Welcome to Transforming Transformational, a TeachBeyond podcast. I'm Keane.
And I'm Heather. We're here to explore what it means to be transformed in our own lives and how that overflows to living lives of transformational impact in our communities.
I am really excited about our conversation today with Dave Totman. Dave was a previous TeachBeyond member who served for 6 years at a few schools, including Sahel Academy in Niger, then moving to teach at the International Christian School of Budapest in Hungary.
I remember meeting the Topmans. It was actually back in 2014 when they were first joining Teach Beyond. And I wasn't yet in my formal role with mobilization. I was still teaching in Germany at the time. But that summer, I was volunteering at Teach Beyond's pre-field orientation that we always have. And I was with the middle school and high school third culture kid or TCK program. And Dave's oldest, Arena, was in that TCK program that summer. And then fast forward to this past summer in 2024. So 10 years later, Arena was at orientation again, but this time she was going out as a missionary to serve in Germany. So definitely a full circle experience.
That is amazing. That is so cool to see all of that come back around. And speaking of TCKs, we also have a number of TCK episodes, which we'd encourage you to check out if you'd like to learn more. We'll link it to a playlist of those episodes in the show notes.
Yeah, that's great to mention that.
And that is only a part of Dave's story. And we are going to be able to hear a lot more about that in this coming conversation.
And Dave's also serving now as the lead pastor of Faith Baptist Church in Winter Haven, Florida. So I'm excited to talk with him about how churches and communities can hold the ropes, as he says, in supporting missionaries.
Let's go over to our conversation now.
Welcome to the podcast, Dave.
Thank you, Heather. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to our time together for sure.
Thanks, Dave. We are very excited to have you. I'm excited to talk to you again. It has been a while. And we're going to start with a question that all people who grew up overseas, all third culture kids love and actually really just hate. And how do you respond when people ask you, where did you grow up? Where are you from?
So it is complicated. And I've learned you've got to read the room. So I typically will say something like, I'll smile and say, I've lived a lot of places. And for some people, that's enough and the conversation ends. But for others that like, well, what do you mean by that? Then I'll probably say something like, well, I was born in Bangladesh, lived there for a while, and then I spent high school years in Kenya. And then, if people are from Asia or if they're from Africa, then they'll be like, well, wait a minute, what do you mean? And where were you in Kenya? And then it goes to other stuff.
Sure. And that leads right into the bigger story of where you have been, where you are now. And certainly the Lord has blessed you with a lot of different opportunities and seasons of life. And we're going to get into that in our conversation today. But just to set the stage, what is your role right now? And then can you give us that quick overview of where your years of ministry have taken you?
Sure. Yeah. So right now I get to serve as a lead pastor. I'm in Florida. And we've been doing that since 2020. But in the church that we're at is our home church. It's our sending church. So this is the church that, in 2002, they held the ropes for us. They had a commissioning service and they sent us out as missionaries. And that led to Cote d'Ivoire, it led to Niger, it led to Hungary. And so just a lot of different stuff. Really, really, by God's grace, gave us the opportunity to serve in a lot of places for about 17 years, 18 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. We just you list off names of countries and very diverse countries all over the globe. And so we want to go back to kind of where your story begins. And we know it doesn't just begin with you, it begins with your parents and your family. So let's start there. Can you fill us in on your parents' involvement in missions?
Sure. My parents, they were called into missions while they were in college, and even their story is it's a God story all the way from the beginning. Where my dad took a language aptitude test and essentially failed it, and the mission that he applied to said, "Yeah, we really don't think that you can be a missionary." His high school guidance counselor told him he wanted to be a medical missionary, and his high school guidance counselor said, "You're not smart enough to go into medicine." Wow. So he just had people, give him bad news for a number of years, but they believed God was taking them into missions, and by God's grace, he allowed them to plant churches, to help churches be planted in 3 different countries. So they were in Bangladesh for a really long time, but my mom got really sick there and they weren't able to return. So then God opened up the door to Kenya, which has a much milder climate and that she could survive in. And so they were in church planting there. And then the mission they were with asked them to go to Ghana because they had some young couples that were were going to Ghana, being called to Ghana, but they needed an experienced couple to lead the team. And the
Sure.
church was on its own and had grown and had its own Kenyan pastor. So they went to Ghana. So they did a lot of discipleship, a lot of one-on-one caring for people. My mom did a lot of literacy stuff to help with ladies, and dad got into a lot of stuff with seminary training and writing Bible courses to help
Mm.
train pastors. So it got allowed them to do a lot of things, but yeah, in a number of countries as well.
Mm. And it's amazing to hear of just how they continued on in the process of discerning what it looked like to serve with those closed doors or seemingly no's along the way. And sometimes the no's can then direct us to the yeses and to realize, oh, this is the direction you're taking me, and not that that's a closed door entirely to mission. So that's really
Yeah.
encouraging.
And I think just to even follow up on that, one of the things that I just love so much about my dad is in those no's, when he was told no, he trusted that what God was doing in his heart and in his life, that God was going to make it happen. So for a guy to be
Mm.
told, you're not smart enough to learn foreign languages, and then go to Bangladesh, which is Bengali is one of the most difficult languages to learn. I mean, and they got fluent in it. He was teaching at a seminary level in Bengali,
Wow.
and he knows Hebrew, he knows Greek, and then he learned Swahili. He could teach and preach in that. Then he learned Eve. But that's
Wow.
God. That's
Yeah.
God's. God is the one that did all of that. And my dad would be the first to say the only way any of that stuff happened was because God gave the grace and God gave the ability to do that. So that's just been an encouragement to me of
Yeah.
where we are weak, where sometimes we feel like, or we've even been told, yeah, you don't have what it takes. God can overcome any of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, it's not a given that a missionary kid or a child of missionary parents would decide that that would be their life direction as well. So, we'd love to hear at what point it was for you that you felt like, okay, I think I want to be a missionary too. And if did you struggle at all with identifying as a missionary since your parents had also been missionaries? Yeah, tell us more about that.
I did, and I think part of it was in my childhood. I saw stuff on the mission field with the missionary adults, and I think in my own perspective, probably through very immature eyes, the way that I saw things, I think I interpreted things probably unfairly or immaturely, and so there were aspects of traditional missions, of church planting missions that I really didn't. I did not feel like I had a place in that, and I wasn't interested in being part of that at all. It did. I was slow to open up, to warm up to the idea that God might want me to serve overseas as a missionary. Maybe that's a fair way of saying that.
Was there a specific event or like way that he sort of softened your heart towards that desire to become a missionary?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is yes. There were he was really working on me. God was really working on me in college. So something happened in high school where the high school I went to was in Kenya, and they one of the teachers instituted a brand new program while I was in high school. It was called Cultural Field Studies (CFS), and they took all the 10th and 11th and 12th graders. They divided them all up into groups of 10 or 12, and they put us in vans, and these
Mhm.
Toyota vans, and they sent us all over East Africa. And we would
Mm.
live with a village. We would live with a family in a village for a week. And
Mm.
some of the villages needed projects done, something repaired or something dug, and other villages we were just invited to live with a family and do their daily life with them. And so my junior year, I was out by Lake Victoria with a Luya family, and I was plowing behind their oxen, and they were teaching us how to fish,
Wow.
and just an incredible experience. At night, we would sit around. The villagers would gather together. They'd eat over an open flame, and they would just tell us about their culture, how dating and marriage happened, how they would settle disputes, and it
Hmm.
was just an incredible experience for a high schooler. But while I was out there, I met this crazy guy. It was one of those. At first, I thought he might be John the Baptist, like just wild beard and all that stuff, right? And so I'm like, "What are you doing out here in the middle of nowhere?" And he said he was an appropriate technologies engineer. And I'm okay. What is that? And so he just explained. I don't think you should bring a tractor out in the middle of nowhere where the tractor is going to break down, and it might help the village for a little bit until a wheel bearing goes, and then you got a rusted piece of junk in a field. He said, I'm out here to help redesign the angle of their plow to make it more efficient, the blade, and I can
Mm.
redesign the stuff that they're doing. He goes, but what happens then is as I'm caring for their life and helping them with the technologies that they have, that opens the door for the gospel because they know I love them and I care for them. And
Huh.
I'm telling you, God used that guy. I don't know his name. I never saw him again, but God planted that seed in my mind to go, okay, wait a minute.
Mm.
My dad's a church planner and he's a Bible, a seminary guy. And I'm interested in engineering. I'm interested in angles and gears and formulas. And so maybe God can use me in with my interest and my gifting in a very different way than my dad. So that God used that seed, and then that started softening my heart. And then through college, God used some other conversations and things. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting that you bring up engineering because you ended up going the route of education eventually and serving with Teach Beyond. So, how did you end up going the route of education and missions?
Yeah, God. So, and I love that. I love hearing people's stories because my experience has been everybody's story is unique, and I love hearing how God leads each of us. But I pursued engineering. I went to a college that could help me with appropriate technologies. But for whatever reason, the college I ended up at, they were very passionate about making a ton of money. And so my first semester, they would bring in guest speakers, and they're like, "You're guaranteed a six-figure income." And I'm old enough that when I went to college, that was a huge sum of money, and but I wasn't there for the money. And I was looking around going, I'm in the wrong place. I don't care about the money. I want to help people. And so God used all of that, and He redirected me to a Bible college. And then at that Bible college, he put the right people in my life, and it became some conversations, and the classes. He started shaping me. And what ended up happening was I met Honora, my wife now, at the time, at a little local church, and we were serving together. And it was as we got plugged into a church, and we were serving in that church. We were the college. I was like the college Sunday school teacher, and then the church took me on staff as an assistant pastor, and so I was preaching and teaching regularly. And at the same time, there were ministry opportunities that were opening up for MKs, TCKs. And this was, again, long enough ago that people didn't really know, how do you help who are these people, and why are they different? And I was even discovering in my own life. I think that's right when the TCK book by Dave Pollock and Ruth Van Reken came out. And so I was just even discovering who I was in what God had done in my life. And so God put those pieces together to really give Honora and I a passion to be able to work with TCKs, and he was showing me that it was through education, it was through teaching. And Honora's an English teacher; she's an amazing teacher, and so but it took a while. It just,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, yeah. So if people are wondering, okay, well, how does this work? It was not a couple of week thing. This was actually a couple of years. It took a while for me to realize
Yeah.
what God was doing, for us
Yeah.
to realize.
That's so interesting to hear about the path God took you on to eventually get
Yeah.
you overseas. It didn't sound like it was a straight line. It sounded like it meandered quite a bit. And I'm curious, what are kind of some of the biggest barriers as you saw what was ahead that it might have been going back overseas? Did you have any barriers you faced as a family as you thought about it?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, if we could just be frank, one of the barriers was team dynamics on the
Mm.
field. I felt like, and again, this was probably immaturity as a kid, but it felt like the missionary grown-ups fought a lot. They didn't get
Hmm.
along. And as I was doing as a young adult in college and trying to learn more about missions and missiology, I realized that I was taught at that time that one of the biggest factors that leads to missionaries leaving the field is conflict with other missionaries. And so that just made me realize, okay, there's got to be a better way of doing this. If we are believers, if we are passionate about following in the steps of Jesus, why in the world can't we get along? And what does that need to look like? I think the financial piece of raising support and how to get to the field, and there was some things. So my parents, again, we. I'm old enough. I think it was before even seatbelts were required by law. So my parents had a Suburban at one point with a mattress in the back, and we had churches from Florida to Alaska. I mean, we have family in Alaska, but we had churches all over the U.S. My parents would just drive for hours and hours and hours visiting churches, and you have whatever 30, 50 churches supporting you. And so when Honora and I were praying about God leading us, if this was the direction we were to go, I said to her over and over again, if God's going to lead us into missions, it's not going to be that way. And we weren't going to buy a Suburban and put a mattress in the back, but I was saying that there's got to be a different way of doing this, and we've got to be able to get along with people. So those were a couple of things that I just said. I think there's got to be another way.
And having that front row seat to what you had experienced in missions as a child and as a teenager certainly impacts, you go in with a little more awareness of what could be in missions,
Yeah.
and that, for better or worse, or just the reality of facing those barriers. So, yeah, that's interesting how that's shaped your perspective on missions. Well, the Lord took you to Cote d'Ivoire, which you mentioned, and then Niger, and then Hungary. Now you're a pastor in Florida in the United States. So that's a lot of moves to different places, and not only new schools and roles, but totally new countries and even continents. So, how did you know when it was time to make each of those moves? I'm sure there's a story around each of those transitions. So, certainly we don't have time to get into all of those stories, but what was it? What is it about those transitions that you knew it was time?
You're 100% right. Some of those there's some crazy stories, some fun stories, some honestly still some somewhat sad stories. God even taking us to Cote d'Ivoire was the sound guy in our church. I mean, went to the pastor and went, "Hey, we should send them," and that led to conversations. And God used that to open the door because a missionary was visiting and said, "We need dorm parents in Cote d'Ivoire," and the sound guy goes, "Yeah, we should send the Thomas." So we did. Um, but but a couple of just some bigger picture pieces. One of them is, and I'm sure, I'm absolutely sure that we could have prayed more, but I think any decisions they've got to be saturated in prayer, and that's something that Honora and I um, try to be really faithful in. And so there was, I got asked to one of the transitions. I got asked to speak at a missions conference, but not as a missionary speaker, as the Bible speaker. That was a really bad idea because I was speaking is doing the preaching, but God was saying you need to be on the field, and uh, and so that was one of the ones. So Honora and I came back from that missions conference, and what we decided to do was we used Operation World and Joshua Project, and we just literally started praying through the countries of the world in our family devotions. And you get a big map out, and the kids were trying to figure out where even some of these countries are. It was so great to pray through the countries of the world and their needs. And those two resources, Operation World, Joshua Project, were fantastic encouragements to us. And that's yeah. So that was one of them. And this may sound crazy, but and maybe not if you know me, but we actually have a spreadsheet. And people that know me well tease me about my multicolored spreadsheets, but we actually do have a spreadsheet, and it's got 20. Ours has 25 different rows of different aspects of a mission field, a potential landing spot, and then there's columns, and so each of us could speak into it. We would ask our kids, and we would pray through and research places, and then we would give each of those 25 rows, those categories, we'd give them a rating of 1 to 5. And it's and the stuff is stuff like how much can we get involved in the culture, like and what's the school, if we're serving at an international school, what's the school culture like, does the school encourage you to be involved in the local culture, is there a local church that we can get involved in, what's the language learning like, what's the culture going to be like for raising teenage daughters. There's lots of different categories, and we also found that not all the categories are even. So some categories are way more important than other categories. Like one of our categories is, climate. Okay, well, climate is something, but we're not going to decide whether God's leading us to a country based on climate. So that has very low, weight, but other categories had high weight. So we would even weight the categories. And that the funny thing is, it does spit out a number, but what actually we found was the process of praying through and considering those different things and the conversations that led to around the dining room table. That was where God was working and shaping our hearts. And even in this last case of when we left Hungary and came back here, mathematically, this decision did not make sense. So yes, we have a spreadsheet, but I think at the end of the day, Honor and I we're very passionate that you open up your hands to God and you say, anywhere, anytime, anything. I just want to be obedient. I'm going to follow you. And you made me in your image, and you've designed me to bring you glory. So I want to bring you glory, and I'll do it anywhere, anytime. I'll do anything to bring you glory. And so if you honestly do that and you open up your hands to God, then you move from Budapest, Hungary to Winter Haven, Florida, and become a lead pastor in COVID.
Yeah.
It did not
Yeah.
make sense, does not make sense, but it was absolutely God
Hmm.
doing that. We don't doubt that for a second.
For our weekly spotlight, we are focusing on the two schools that we mentioned where Dave and his family serve, Sahel Academy in Niger and the International Christian School of Budapest in Hungary. We've linked to both of those in the show notes, and you can also learn more at teachbeyond.org/go.
And now back to the conversation with Dave.
I love how there's the partnership of intentional prayer and research and conversation, that all of those are important. If it just comes down to the numbers or even what our family thinks is a good idea and it's not bathed in prayer, well then it's just a good human idea. But if it's we're just going to pray about this, that can go on for a long time if there isn't intentional conversation and direction towards, okay, let's make some practical take some practical steps in that, right? So I love how you're talking about it's okay to make a spreadsheet and do what works for your family, get the map out. That's not taking the reins away from God, as long as there's listening and processing and involving your local community and, discernment process. So, yeah, I really appreciate you kind of talking through those different elements for your family.
Can I tag on to what you were saying about bringing on your local community? And I because I failed to mention that, but that's been a huge part of it too. Is um, we we we've been very, very blessed that God has put spiritual counsel in different chapters of our lives in different countries, but God's been very consistent about bringing people around us that we recognize that they are wise, that God has shaped them, and so we've sought their counsel as well. There was one particular instance I remember we were praying through options, and there was two options and we really didn't know. We actually met with our mission committee at our church, and we got a big whiteboard and we wrote all over the whiteboard, and the mission committee is sitting there, and I think there's 8 or 9 adults, and we prayed and prayed, and the mission committee said we really think it's A. And so that it became A, and that was actually when um, I was invited to be the Africa director with the regional director with TeachBeyond. Our mission committee helped make that decision to move into that role. And so I think looking for wise counsel around you, that they're also praying. I think that's a really vital piece of discerning God's will.
You mentioned that the church you're serving in now is actually that sending church. So probably that same church that pulled out the big whiteboard.
Yeah, it is.
And it sounds like missions has been a big part of your local church, and it's kind of been championed by your local church. So as you think about serving your community, being involved in your local community, as you were saying, and I'm sure there's lots of needs all around your church. What is the motivation to also care so much about global missions and other countries, other areas?
Yeah, I've loved learning. So coming back in as the new lead pastor here, obviously I've pulled out the church history. I've pulled out we have some charter documents. We are 48 years old, and so there are actually a few of the original charter members still here, and I
Mm-hmm.
just love that. And so from the very beginning, the DNA of the church, they wanted to reach our local community, and they wanted to be a mission-minded church. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely not something that I've introduced. It's baked into who we are as a local body. But I love that the church really believes that we talk about the Acts 1:8 principle of our Judea and our Samaria, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and we are called to reach our neighbors. We are called to reach our wider community, but we are also called to be the gospel light around the world. And I think it's a joy to be able to do all. I don't think those need to be mutually exclusive in any way. I think that you can do all of them, all three of those levels simultaneously with joy, and God rewards it and He blesses it. Yeah, I could talk for a long time on that.
Well, I think that is so important to remember that it is that outreach, that advancing the gospel takes on different forms and different contexts,
Yeah,
right? And
it does.
and you mentioned the phrase earlier in this conversation, hold the rope. And
Yeah.
I'd love for you to share a little bit more about what it means for churches to hold the rope. What does that look like practically and kind of why that phrase?
Yeah. So if I understand the history right, William Carey believed God was calling him to India. This is in the late 1700s, 1790s, and but that was pretty early in mission history, and as far as getting support. And so what happened was there was five guys, and William Carey went, but those guys that stayed behind, they were praying for him. And one of them is, I think his name's Andrew Fuller. He used this analogy of, he said, it's as if William Carey is going down into a mine, and, but we're going to be up on the top, and we're going to hold the rope as he goes down in, so that we can then pull him back out as he's needed, but that he has that lifeline. And so we literally as a church have totes with giant yellow rope. And when we commission a missionary, we literally drag the ropes through the meeting room, all through the aisles and everything. And we encourage anyone who is committing, and it's a serious commitment of, here's what I'm committing to do, with to pray faithfully for them, to help meet their financial needs, to help meet their spiritual and emotional needs. But we invite people to step out of their chairs and go physically grab that golden rope, through a time of prayer of, no, I'm going to hold the rope here. And our church did. I mean, we were evacuated. We had a medical evacuation. We had a military coup that we had to be evacuated from, and the church did. They held the rope all the way through that.
Mm,
And
mm,
so we've been the recipients of seeing a church be faithful to that. I mean, even the mission committee meeting with us and saying, no, we'll go to prayer for you and let's help you with this decision. That's part of holding a rope. So I think churches can do it in a lot of different ways, but we've taken it as very hands-on. We need to know our missionaries. We need to care for our missionaries, and that's way beyond caring for just their financial needs. It's, we try to stay in touch with them. We assign a mentor to the missionary, and they meet monthly. And the idea with the mentor is the mentor can get to know them, so that the missionary can be, not that a missionary is ever going to be dishonest with a mission committee or a church, but there's some things you can't share with 10 or 12 or 20 people, but you could share with one. And so there's just this vital link with the mentor, and then we trust the mentor. If they feel it's a necessary thing, they'll bring it to the mission committee, and they'll say it in a way that can be shared publicly. So there's a lot of different layers to it, but I have loved that our church wants to deeply care for and support the missionaries that we have the privilege of sending out.
Mhm. It's amazing to hear how you're doing that, and that I love the rope idea. I love the visual of the rope, and the actual tangible of how you're actually doing it. Is there anything you'd want to tell churches and pastors about, maybe one piece of advice is how they could care for their members who are serving overseas and serve them well?
Yeah, I mean, this could be really, really small, but as a pastor, I get lots of missionary prayer letters now, and I'm assuming all pastors that are hearing this are the same way. We're on a lot of lists, and we love getting them, and we love hearing the prayer requests and the praises. And so, one thing I would say is, as we read through those reports, and as we see prayer requests. When possible, it does not need to be a dissertation, but just even a line back to that missionary of, hey, I noticed that request about your son in college. I've got a son in college, and I'm praying for you. If I can do any more, I'd be happy to pray. But you've got a friend praying for you. Just even a little line like that, of just that personal touch of, I hear you, I hear what you're saying, and I love you, and I'm for you. That can be just an incredible drink of cold water to someone on the field. And there's lots of different ways. Sometimes meeting tangible needs. If someone just kind of puts a little conversation bubble in a prayer letter of, yeah, my laptop died, I'm sending this on my phone. Well, maybe we can send them a new laptop or something. There's ways of meeting tangible needs, but I think maybe for us in the States or wherever we are sending countries, one way to support is to read the prayer updates carefully, and then we're all humans. Let's engage at a human level of with compassion, right?
Yeah. That's a all the way around communication is so key in the sending and supporting of missionaries and missionaries thriving, like the communication all different directions. And I love that really practical and actually free way to support someone, that it is it goes a long way to communicate about prayer support and just to have be a listening ear. So that's great. So what about thinking of a different, group of people? What about for someone who is discerning a call to missions? And sometimes even that phrase of a call to missions can feel overwhelming or like, I don't know if I really feel called. What would be your advice to someone who's kind of in that seat right now?
Yeah. So, and it's, I mean, a couple different things I would say. One is obviously be praying. I would pull in a spiritual counselor, whether that's a pastor or Sunday school teacher, small group leader, Bible study leader, but pull in someone else and ask them to pray. When folks come to me here at Faith and they're interested in missions, I start asking questions. Okay, are you going on any mission trips? Are you engaging? What does that look like over the next couple of months or years? What kind of trips can we plug you into? Another question is, are you reading missionary biographies?
Mm,
Are you diving into the lives of other missionaries and seeing how God led them and what happened with that? So and then the other one is obviously I'm a local church pastor, but I also did this when I was a mission leader. One of my interview questions for prospective missionaries is, how are you serving right now?
mhm.
So a big part for me is, are you already engaged, or are you looking for ways to be engaged? So that's how God has shaped Honora and I. Um, where someone at one point said, a boat that's for a boat that's tied to the dock, the rudder is worthless. The rudder is doing nothing if a boat's tied to the dock. Once you push off, that rudder then can direct the boat anywhere. And so I don't want to be a boat tied to the dock asking God to lead me. I want to push off from the couch. I want to serve in my church. I want to serve in my community. And as I'm serving, then God's that rudder that will start directing that. And so those are some of the different ways that I'm encouraging. I mean, I've got a board right next to my computer here of young adults that I'm praying for, that I've said, I think God might be leading me into ministry, and I don't know what that looks like. And so I'm praying for them. And then Honora and I are having a young lady over in 3 nights for supper, and we talk. Okay, what's going on now? How are you doing? What are you doing in your devotions? How's God leading you? So I think you need to have conversations with brothers and sisters in Christ who will pray for you and encourage you along the way to discern God's will.
Mm. And what a gift to have your mentorship and prayer even as they're walking through that. So that's a huge encouragement to those who might be in the community of someone who's trying to discern this. Like you have a role to play too, to be praying with them and providing, that input along the way as you have the voice to do that. So that's great, Dave. Well, another hat that you wear that we have to mention in this conversation is that you're also a Teach Beyond dad, meaning that your oldest daughter actually joined Teach Beyond as a Teach Beyond member this past year, and so she has made the decision to become a missionary herself and serve at Black Forest Academy. So, how has that shaped your view of missions? What does it mean for you to be a Teach Beyond dad, having served with Teach Beyond in the past yourself, and having all these different roles in mission?
It's fantastic. I love it. It has been wild. I've been the guy that, obviously as a dad, I've had the passports, I've done the international driver's licenses, then the local licenses and all that stuff, and worked through the permis de séjours, the residence cards, all that stuff. And now Arena's doing it. She's got to do it on her own. But I love the team that Teach Beyond is. I love the all along the way. She's had coaches. She's had the staff that's around her at BFA. And so it's a huge, as a dad, it's an enormous encouragement that she has such a great team. We got to meet a few of them. And just I'm just so thankful for the godly, loving people that are around her. And so I'm I yeah I'm it's a we have the little bit of the inside track because we had the privilege of being with Teach Beyond for a number of years ourselves. So we already know how much we love Teach Beyond. But even from the outside, our church has also just been thrilled with this onboarding process that Arena went through and getting to meet some different people. Teach Beyond has sent people here twice to our church. It's been incredible, and the partnership with the local church. And so I love it. I'm very thankful and happy as a Teach Beyond dad.
Well, it's been personally so fun for me because you know that back when your family was joining Teach Beyond the first time, I was helping out with the
That's right.
middle school program,
Yeah.
and Arena was in that as a middle schooler. So it's amazing to see how, God has worked in her life. And obviously, it's not just because her parents are with Teach Beyond, but it's certainly amazing to see that legacy continue and working in her life in that way.
Dave, it's been so great to talk to you and hear your story. And it is a amazing story from your parents to you to now your daughter and your kids. Um, so just thank you for coming on and sharing that story. And before we let you go, though, we have one final thing that we ask all of our guests, and that's what's one thing that's changing your life right now. So this can be something big and very serious, or something light and small. You can kind of
I'll
take it
warn you,
whichever way.
mine is very light this week, so,
Hey,
just a
that's all
fair
good.
warning.
No, it's all good.
So you can take it where you'd like to. So I'll go first, and then Heather, and then you can go last. You have a little bit of time to think about it.
Awesome. All right.
Um, the thing that's changing my life and our family's life is this actually all the way goes back to Christmas, but we got some Lego sets from different people on Facebook and things. And it's been fun to have I grew up with Legos, but it was just a big bin of unknown Legos. But now having actual sets where it's an instruction manual and you kind of go through the pages and go through each step, it's been
Hmm,
so fun. It's so kind of just relaxing and soothing to just go step by step, Lego by Lego. So that's what's been changing my life.
that's awesome.
So Dave is walking away from the screen, picking up his own Lego set. Oh,
Yeah,
that is a good,
that's
good looking truck.
amazing. Yes, is that a front loader, or what do you have there,
It
Dave?
is, yeah, yeah. And so this is Trey and mine. I'm with you that yeah, Legos change the world for the
That's
better.
They do.
awesome.
I think that's fantastic.
And Trey is not a 5-year-old, he's a college age, right? So,
Correct.
this Kian, you have many years ahead of you with your little boys
This is
eventually,
a lifetime
becoming
journey.
teenagers and 20-somethings.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, what's changing my life, I warned you, it is the learning that by clicking on Instagram in the app, the word Instagram, you can change your feed to just people that you follow. And it's been a game changer because, there's more and more in the main feed that is like they're trying to get you to follow these other accounts. But you can, just narrow it down by
Filter
clicking
that out.
on Instagram and just the people you're following. So, for all of you out there who already knew that, you can just skip past that comment. But for those of you who didn't, maybe that's a happy PSA for today. So,
That's a pro hack right there. That's
yeah, there you go. Maybe that tells you something about my use of time. But anyway, Dave, what is changing your life these days?
Uh, so I was encouraged a little bit ago to allow dead guys or dead ladies to disciple me, and
Mm,
what they meant was pick a person that died a while ago and then invest in them for 6 months or 12
mm,
months and just read what you can. And so I decided, like Kean, at the start of the year, I said, okay, this year I don't know whether it'll be 6 months or 12 months, but I want to learn more about Charles Spurgeon. I know the name, I've heard about him, seen some funny pictures of him, but I have no idea who he actually is or what he teaches. So, um, someone had given me a morning by morning devotional that he wrote, and so I'm
mm,
reading that each morning. And I got a Spurgeon a study Bible, and so I'm
mm.
reading that for my daily devotions. And I've
Nice.
been able to read 2 biographies, and I'm telling you, I have it has been so good for me.
Mm,
He just loved Jesus, and he
mm,
wanted people to know Jesus, and he's also really insightful. So it's really been just great nourishment to me. I'm loving getting
mm,
to know him better, and he's feeding me each morning. So that's been
mm.
a fun being discipled by a dead guy right now.
Yeah, what a great suggestion. And I think we've quoted Spurgeon on here before, that really commonly known quote about "I've learned to kiss the wave that throws me against the rock of ages." I
Mm.
don't know if you've encountered that in your study so far, but that's a great person to be learning from this year. So, what a good encouragement to us. We'll have to see if anyone takes you up on that challenge. That you didn't issue a challenge there, but curious to hear from anyone who decides to do that yourself too. So, well, thank you, Dave, so much for this conversation, for sharing about your story and just truly how God has been at work in your life. I know you'd be the first one to acknowledge that none of this is because of something great you've done or because you're so good at being obedient, but truly because of the spirit at work in you. And so thanks for sharing humbly about that and how you've seen God at work and how that can inspire others to take steps in obedience to the Lord too.
Well, I appreciate the invitation. I really do. It's just great to be able to talk with both of you again and spend some time together. I do
Yeah.
miss both of you. Loved our time at Teach Beyond. So this is just a sweet reunion for
Yeah.
me. Thank you.
Yeah, what a blessing. All right, well, thanks again for coming. Keane and I serve with an organization called Teach Beyond. As you have heard, education plays a big role in missions, and Teach Beyond is a part of that.
As followers of Jesus, TeachBeyond is a global community providing transformational education services as part of God's ongoing mission to transform individuals and communities into all He intends.
Want to learn more and get involved? Visit teachbeyond.org or follow us on social media.
To help more people find the podcast and hear about TeachBeyond, we'd love it if you would leave a rating or review and share the show with a friend. Be sure you're subscribed or following the show on the platform where you listen so you never miss an episode.
And as always, you can reach us at podcast@teachbeyond.org. We'll see you next week.